of the SLOUCHYzipper Sewalong. I didn't do a good job of describing this while I was making the video, but you're going to need your zip attachment strips, which is the pattern piece J from the SLOUCHYzipper Add On tutorial, so you can download that for free from the website. The attachment strips are 5 centimeters. Let me see, that's it there. So the actual pattern piece is 5 centimeters tall, and for the medium it's 34 centimeters or 13.5 inches wide, and for the large it's also 5 centimeters tall, which is 2 inches high, and it's 41 centimeters wide, which is 16.25 inches wide. There's a zipper tab, which we're actually not going to use until the next stage, but that's also you can print that off from the zipper add-on tutorial, and that's about 6 centimeters wide or 2.5 inches, and about 10.5 centimeters or 4.25 inches long. So that's what you'll need for the kind of the extra part of adding the zipper in, along with an actual zipper. So I've used a continuous zipper for my slouchy shopper, so I will be showing you how to turn the corner there and sew it in. And later on, again at the end of stage 3, I'm going to add a little zipper stop, and also I'll show how to make the zipper tab at the end. So for the medium size slouchy shopper, you'll need, if you're using a closed ended zip, you'll need a 45 centimeter or an 18-inch closed ended zip. And if you're using a continuous zipper, you need a minimum of about 47 centimeters or 19 inches. As you'll see in the video, I left mine cut long, or I just left it the full length of the piece of tape I had until the very end. So I suggest you do the same, just leave it long. It's a little bit awkward to work with, but it means you can cut it at exactly the length that you personally find works best for the bag. But certainly 47 centimeters or 18 inches works for medium, and 57 centimeters or 23 inches works for the large. And if you're using a fixed ended like a standard zip for the large size, you will need a 55 centimeter or 22 inch zipper. So that's it. Let's get started with stage 2. Before we start, we'll also cover assembling the lining bag, and we'll cover here just making those little strap connection pieces, and we will cover making the adjustable strap. So I didn't actually use an adjustable strap on this slouchy shopper. You can see it here on my lovely squishy corduroy one. But I cover how to make it all, and I pin it into place so that you know what you're doing if that's the version you'd like to make. Okay, let's get started with stage 2. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press a fold at the end of these, a 1 centimeter fold at the end of all 4 pieces. Okay, I'm pressing towards the back of the fabric, toward the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to do. Okay, so they're all pressed with a roughly 1 centimeter. I guess it's a seam allowance on either side, on both sides. The next thing I'm going to do is prepare my zipper. So let's just place these here. And so the easiest way to get the zipper on right is to trim off a little bit off one end. So we have one opening end, which is down this end, and we have one closed end. So I'm not going to trim this, you only need about half of this for the medium. I think it's 45 centimeters long, which is 18 inches for the medium size, and 55, which is 22 inches, 55 centimeters or 22 inches for the larger size of the slouchy shopper. But I'm just going to leave it at the 1 meter length for now, and then I'll trim it down when I'm getting ready to do that. So I have my 2 ends, which are more or less in line, which is great. I'm going to just close that right up. And I'm going to mark using my red pen very carefully. Hopefully it doesn't bleed on me too much. I'm just going to mark a little red mark there, another one on the same side, same position on both sides. And now I'm going to open that up again, sorry for the bang, and I'm going to fold this in. And what you're looking for is that that's perpendicular, okay? That's a right angle. And then you're going to do the same on the other side in the same position. And so I think they're pretty close to being perfect, okay? So I'm going to pin them, and then I'm going to sew along here very close to the edge of the tape to secure them. And then I'm going to melt that with a lighter. I don't know if I have a lighter in the house. We should do. I usually have one of my sewing stuff. But we went camping recently, so the lighter might have disappeared at the campsite. So I'm going to sew along there, and I'm going to try and melt along there with the lighter if I can find one. That's just to stop the tape fraying over time. Okay, that's on one side. And the same on the other side. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do is trim those down first, is what I should have said, and then see if I can go find a lighter. Just use that. Okay. Okay, let's go see if I can find a lighter. So I'm just gonna really gently run that along there. Okay, the other side. Okay, that'll just stop it fraying. We have our zipper tape ready with the corners done. We have our 4 pieces of 2 main outer and 2 main lining, or 2 lining and 2 outer, the zipper side strips. So we'll take one of each. And we're going to make sure that the right side of the outer fabric is facing the right side of the lining fabric. And we're going to place that 1 centimetre seam allowance by the edge of the zipper tape, but with enough space that you can get your zipper foot past it. So you need to make sure it's maybe, could be as much as half a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, 3/16 of an inch past it, so that you can sew down there. Now you can obviously sew with a tiny little bit less of a seam allowance if it's isn't working out exactly. But we're going to pin all of that together, and the lining, the right side of the lining facing the back of the zipper tape. And we're going to pin them in place. Now, this final pin is going to be put in at the edge of the seam allowance if it were folded in, because that's what we're going to do with this end. We're going to be folding the seam allowance in when we're top stitching. but at this end we're going to be sewing up here and across. But at this end we're going to be stopping and back stitching, and we want to make sure that we can fold our seam allowance in at the end. So I put a yellow pin there, and I know to stop there. Okay. So the easiest way for me to sew this would be probably from the lining side, because I'm going to be sewing up and turning down this way. So I'm going to go with the 1 centimeter seam allowance, and hopefully I'll just test it and see if I can get past. Yeah, I can get past the edge of my zipper tape there. So at this stage you should have your zipper foot on. I'm not using a zipper foot because I just like this foot a lot, and I'm happy that you can get close enough to the tape with it. But if you have a wide foot on your sewing machine and you need to change to your zipper foot, now is a good time to do it. So I've stitch length of 2.5 again. Sew up here as straight as I can. I'm just going to make sure I'm going to want to sew this in with about between anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 mil of a seam allowance along here. So I'll go with, I think that feels like it's about 7. And what I am missing here is I can't see my stripe. So hopefully I sew it nice and neatly along. The stripe can so go slowly going over your zipper tape, or your zipper teeth rather. Okay, so unfortunately the camera stopped halfway through sewing down the seam, and then I had folded over and top stitched before I realised. So I'm going to repeat the process on the other side and you'll get the same idea. So I'm going to take my outer fabric and my lining fabric, and with the outer fabric facing the right side of the zipper and the lining fabric facing the wrong side of the zipper, I'm going to line the fabrics up against the edge of the zipper tape, move my slider out of the way actually. Good bit. And I'm going to, in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to see if I can get these to line up exactly. These ends to line up first. So I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to pin halfway along as well. So then I'll move my zipper out of the way and then pin along this way. And so I want that to, again, remember we have to be able to stitch along side the edge of the zipper. So I'm giving myself a few mil to do that. And hopefully this is going to end up at the exact same length as the zipper tape, which I think it is, and that's fine. So I'll be able to stitch along there, along beside the edge of the zipper tape, or the teeth of the zipper, and this more or less meets the end here as well. If I need to stitch into the seam allowance a little bit to make sure they line up perfectly, I'll do that, but I'll wait till I have it all stitched in place to see. And I'll put my lining matching up as well. Okay. What I'm doing here is I'm going to fold that over, fold the seam allowance back over, and I'm going to move this pin so that it's sitting quite close to it, and I'm going to end my line of sewing here. So I'm going to be sewing along here with roughly a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I should have enough room to get past there with my zipper foot. And then I'm going to turn and sew along here with about a 7 mil seam allowance. So I might try and mark that. So I don't need to mark it. That's actually working out as being along this joint here in my stitching. So I was going to put a pin in there like that. Well, I might as well still do it. And I know to stop at that point and then turn. And so I'm not including that extra bit of tape there. I'm just including the edge of the zipper tape. Okay. My stitch length is set at 2.5. Sewing with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I'll just check and make sure that I can get past the edge of the zipper tape there with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. That's what I'm going to go with. And I'm stopping just at my pin there that I've marked to turn. And that's actually a little bit short, so I'm going to go to diagonal there. Yeah, now that's a 7mm seam allowance. So 7mm is somewhere around, so somewhere between 3/16 and 1/4 inch. So it's around a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to stop here at my yellow headed pin, back stitch. Okay. I did sew over those pins. The reason I sewed over those pins, I was quite careful as I was going, was that kind of the creep can't go any further than the pin if you leave it in. Now there's a risk of puckering at that, but I could see that it wasn't puckering, so I just kept going. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to turn this out. So kind of treat it like the other seams, but don't worry about it too much because you'll be able to pull the seam the right way out because you've got the zipper tape there. You'll be able to pull the fabric the right way out quite easily. And get my little pokey stick to poke that out. So that's pretty neat. So I'm going to bring it over and press it. But what I am going to do first is check here, and I'll do it again when it's pressed. I'll do it as I'm pressing, is make sure that my make sure that the ends here are going to line up when I top stitch. So there's nothing holding this in place at the moment at the very end, so the top stitching is going to do the work at this end. So firstly, that's nicely lined up, so that's great. Secondly, I've sewn my seam allowance reasonably straight with my stripe, so that's a bonus. And thirdly, when I press it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the seam allowance in and fold it over, just keeping the seam allowance little bit here in behind the main piece, so just to hide it in behind. And I'm going to check and see if that is lining up with that, which it is. So I'm happy to use the pressed seam allowance that I pressed beforehand as my guide, and I will make sure the lining in behind matches. What I will do, what's okay actually, is if the lining is the tiniest bit smaller, there'll be no harm, because then it won't be popping out and visible in behind from in behind. I just want to make sure that when I top stitch it, I can catch the lining as well in the top stitching. So I'll do all that pressing over and I'll talk through again. Okay, so that is not bad at all. My ends are lined up quite neatly. I kept the original 1 centimeter seam or 3/8 inch seam allowance on the outer fabric. The lining fabric ended up a little bit shorter, so I just reduced the seam allowance a little bit so that I can so that it lines up nicely with the outer fabric. And now I'm going to top stitch along here and edge stitch along as kind of evenly close to the edge of the fabric as I can. I'm just going to make sure that my there's no threads sticking out on me. Just push them all in there. That my lining is lined up. I put a pin in that to hold it, and that this is kind of staying straight and even here as well. Changing my stitch length to 3.5. To get that pin. So I think I'm not going to get away with using the stripe. I've got dark thread in and dark stripe and light stripe, so I think I'm going to end up seeing the stitching on my light stripe, which will irritate me a little bit, but so be it.
So again, I'm usually looking at other points on my
And I'm just going to go diagonally a little bit here because I don't want a full stitch length. Now, I'm pretty happy with that. So that's my zip prepared. I've still got all that extra length of zipper tape, and I'm going to leave that on right till the end, and then I can judge exactly how long I'd like it for my bag, because I'll probably have it hanging into the bag a bit. And for now, I'm just going to leave it as is so that I don't waste any tape by cutting it too short or too long prematurely. One thing I am going to do now before I do anything else is put a pin across my zipper tape so that I don't accidentally pull my zipper off. It's unlikely that I will get all that down that far, but you never know. So putting a pin across my zipper tape, that's the first thing to do. So then the next step in the tutorial would be to sew the main lining together, which would be to just move that out of the way. So if I was, and I think I'll continue in the same process, or I will continue in the same process. So you collect your main lining front and back, and you sew down the side seams and across from the notch position and the notch position there, and then box up the corners. And then the next step would be to take the facing and sew that right sides together, and then add the facing to the lining. And effectively we're going to do the same steps. What I'm going to do is sew the linings together as per the tutorial, and then I'm going to add the zipper tape in place to the lining. So I'll have that centered on there, I'll have this centered on the other side, and then I'll add the facing on top of that. So I'll do it step by step. So first up is just like the tutorial, where we're going to sew the main panels of the lining together. So I'm going to pin the side seams together. And the tutorial calls up to sew this with a slightly bigger seam allowance. And the reason that is that when we're finished making the bag, and the bag is finished, the lining sits inside the outer bag. And so therefore it technically should have a slightly smaller circumference than the bag, than the outer bag. The lining bag should have a slightly smaller circumference than the outer bag. Now when you're sewing it, they should really have the exact same length of edge as you sew the top seams in. But in reality, when I'm sewing it, I'm going to have the lining bag inside the outer bag. So it's not going to have a problem being a tiny bit smaller, and in the end, it'll sit neatly. If you sew them with the same seam allowance, it'll be totally fine. we know that I'm using a fabric with a good bit of give in it, so we'll be able to ease them in to fit each other anyway. But fundamentally I'm going to sew the outer the lining fabric seam allowances here with 1.2 centimeter seam allowance, which is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I'm not going to go quite as far as a 1/2 inch, but I'm just going to go ever so slightly bigger than the 3/16 inch 3/8 inch seam allowance that I've sewn the outer seams with. So it's just over. In my machine, I've got the number 10 written here for 10 millimeters, and so I just use the edge of the 0 on the 10 as my guide. So I've back stitched at the front, the top and the end, the start and the end. Now I'm going to sew the other side seam. Now another comment I'd like to make, which is a couple of my testers suggested that we add the facing to the main lining on both sides first and then sew the bag together. And I agree that is an easier way to construct the bag than making one circular seam and then add another circular seam onto it. But I prefer how the seams sit at the edge when I sew the bag together, the facing together, and then add them, and I'll show you that later. But for now I've sewn the side seams, so I'm going to press them open now before I do anything else. Okay, so I've pressed open my side seams. I'm now going to sew the bottom seam from notch out and notch out. So there's a space here to turn the bags right side out. Okay, so I'm going to sew this also with the slightly bigger seam allowance. And I'm going to press this seam open along the full length of the bag so that when I'm going to be hand stitching that hole closed, it'll be easy to keep my line. So I'm going to press it open along the full length. Okay. So I've pressed open the side seams and I have a nice crease there to guide me when I'm sewing closed the lining later on. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to box out the corners. Of the bag. So in this case we're just going to be aligning the seam, the side seam and the bottom seam with each other and pin in place. I'll use my 2 pins that I usually do. Just making sure that the seam line lines up. And this is going to be at the very bottom of your bag, so nobody's really going to see it, but it's still nice to have your seams lining up and to have them running perpendicular to each other, so that that's running perpendicular to that edge and on top of itself, or on top of the other seam. Now on this we don't have to worry about passing any stitches here, making sure we have everything enclosed, but we did sew the outer seam with a roughly a 1.5 centimeter or a full 1/2 inch seam, or more than 1/2 inch, nearly 3/4 inch seam allowance. It's not quite 3/4, it's somewhere between the two actually. I'll note that here in the text. So I'm going to sew along there with about a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, and I'll confirm what that is in inches in the text. matching thread on one side and dark on the other, but it's just within the seam or within the lining. I don't think you're ever going to see the non-matching thread, hopefully anyway. So again, to the other side. Make sure my so that's the, just going to always check all your seams and make sure everything is nice and neat in there, no threads sticking out, because they're much easier to get rid of at this stage. So they're all pretty perfect. Okay, so the next step, well, the next step for the for both of us is going to be to sew the facings together, and then I'm going to go back and attach the zipper to here as a separate step. So we'll stick with the original tutorial, and we're going to sew the facing pieces together. So we're going to be sewing them right side together with the side seams lined up. And again, this will be with that 1.2 slightly bigger seam allowance. And as you can see, I didn't bother pinning this time. So it's a nice short seam. And I'm going to press those seams open. Okay, so if you're proceeding without a zipper, you will at this stage, and I'll do the step without sewing it, I'll just pin it into place. So I'm going to be getting my center notch of my facing and matching it with the center notch of the main bag, which is actually the center notch of the pocket. And then on the other side, I've got my center notch, wherever it is, there it is there, of the facing with the center notch of the bag. And so these are right sides together. Then I will match my side seam notches, or my side seams rather. So that's the facing inserted into the lining bag, right sides together. So what I tend to do then is I hold my two pinned positions, and you can see that facing is behaving a bit bigger than the bag, isn't it? So what I'll do is I'll just try and ease that in. So I don't know why that has happened, but it has. Just check and see if it's the same on the other side. No, it's not the same on the other side. And that is fine. And that is fine. So I feel like one of my notches is slightly off. So what I'll do is I'm going to pull this over a tiniest bit. Pull that over a tiny bit. See if that helps. So that feels much better there. And that feels fine there too. So don't worry about what you've marked. Trust your judgment. If something isn't lining up, there's a chance one of my notches is slightly off, or the seam allowances are slightly different or something like that. So what I'll do is I'll pin the center point there as well. That is now good to sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So when you sew it around the perimeter with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, you're then going to press the facing up, press it here, and top stitch along it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to add the zippers to the lining, and then do the exact same process again. I have my prepared zipper, And we didn't mark a center notch on this because I figured these seam allowances might change, the position just might all change a little bit. So I'm going to mark the center points now of this edge seam here. So you just line up the two ends and mark. So what I do is just pinch it to create a little crease, and then I have my dangerously permanent pen, and I will mark the center, and I'll do the same on the other side. So I'm joined up the ends, I'm pinching the center, and then mark that. Okay, so I'm going to just take out my pen and move it down a little bit actually, and I'm going to open my zipper. So actually I'm going to close it again. What I need to figure out is which way I want my zipper to open. So if this is my bag, I like to have this pocket on the back of the lining and nothing on the front of the lining, so it's the pocket sits against your side when you're wearing it. And because I'm right-handed, I usually want my zip to open from left to right. So if I have the bag sitting on my hip or sitting in front of me, I want to open it from left to right. So that means the open end of my zipper needs to be on this side of the bag here. So with the right side of the zipper facing up, facing me, and the right side of the lining facing up, so the lining of the zipper is facing the right side of the lining bag, I'm going to join the center points, which are there. Okay, so that's one side added, and then on the other side I'm going to be pinning again with the right side facing up, it's joining center point to center point. Okay, so you'll see that I've left this with a bit of a gap to the edge. First of all, that's to accommodate the thickness of the zipper panel, let's say, the width of it. But also I want the bag still to be slouchy, so I don't want anything to be restricting the zip kind of going down into the bag and the bag doing its thing. So I've left the zipper panels shorter than the width of the bag. So the next thing I'm going to do is base that in place. So use a 3/16 inch seam allowance or a 1/2 centimeter seam allowance to sew that in place. So it's one side sewn in. So as I can see, you can see my fabric is still creeping on me. So I'm going to just hold it flat and in place with my stitch ripper as I sew. So I don't mind it creeping a tiny bit, but I don't want it to keep creeping too much. Now I want to make sure here that my lanyard is sitting nice and straight down and it's not dragging or pulling on the lining. So I'm happy with that. It's all sitting securely, or sorry, it's sitting perpendicular to the seam. So that's the zipper basted in place. Just put that into the bag for the moment, and what we'll end up doing is I'll make a judgment as to how far out that should go. I'd say it'll be roughly 10 centimeters or about 4 inches out from the edge of the bag, so that it kind of can sit and drop down, and also that when you open it, it doesn't it's not too short, and that you can open it fully, so the bag can be opened fully. So we're going to go back to the step that I had pinned in already, which was the facing that we prepared, and now we're going to pin it back in and sew it with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. So what I need to do is just open my zip and make sure it's in and out of the way and it's not going to get caught in any seams, and pin this in place with the right side of the facing facing the right side of the lining and the main fabric of the zipper panel, and starting with the center seams first, or the center notches first rather. Make sure the center notch. Now my facing has no kind of top side or bottom side, but you might have a directional facing, so just make sure you have you're using the bottom notch of the facing to match the top of the bag, because then when you fold it up, your top notch will be there. And the center seam, the center notch is there. To match my center notch there. My side seams. And I think I'll put I tend to try and put 2 pins in at a seam like this to keep my seam allowances flat, so that when I'm sewing across it, one doesn't get pushed over by the machine. Making sure my zip's out of the way. There's a lot of loose threads there, isn't there?
Trim some of them off.
Okay, so we're going to check the lengths of these seam lines again, because again I think we're going to feel like one is a little bit longer. Yeah, I think my notch position is the tiniest bit off there, so I think it's better. So that feels good. I'm going to pin these points here as well, halfway between the other 2 pins. Okay, so I think that's plenty of pins in there. I'm going to be leaving the bag with the right side of the lining still on the inside, and adding the facing, and I'm going to have that same issue of this creeping, so I'm going to use I'm actually going to add another few pins, because this fabric is proving a little tricky. So you can start anywhere along the seam, and what you're just going to make sure that you meet back with your seam. So I'm sewing the top seam with a the facing seam with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, or 3/8 of an inch. One thing I didn't do, which I should have, was make sure my lanyard was still running perpendicular before I sewed across it, but it's worked out fine, thankfully. Now I'm going to press it open. I'm going to get rid of all of these threads now, and then I'm going to top stitch along here with the seam allowance pressed up, so the facing pressed up and the seam allowance cut in that. Remember I mentioned that some of my testers suggested that you attach the facing to the lining, to the front lining, and the facing to the back lining and then attach the linings together. But I prefer it this way because I like that the facing masters the full panel of the lining bag. And then if these are staggered a little bit from each other, it doesn't really matter. At least your little top stitching that you're going to run along here is going to run straight and true, and it'll kind of tie the whole bag together neatly, and looks better than having top stitching meeting or maybe not meeting the top stitching that was coming from the other direction. So I prefer to do it this way. So I'm going to press this now and then come back and top stitch along this seam. I think that looks great with the stripes running in the opposite direction to each other, perpendicular to each other. So now I'm going to start in near the zipper side seam, because this is the little area you're going to see least, and I'm going to do my top stitching around the bag. Then changing my stitch to about 3.5. And again, picking a point on my zipper foot that I'm going, not my zipper foot, my presser foot that I'm going to sew along. And because I'm using dark thread, I'm going to start in a dark zone of my fabric to conceal where the stitches overlap at the end. So as I sew along the perimeter of the bag, I'll straighten the bag out ahead of where I'm going to stitch. And then I'll stitch up to that, and then I'll pause and I'll straighten the bag out again, rather than trying to adjust it as I go along. So we're getting close to the start of the seam, and I can see it there. I'm going to keep my eye on that so that I line up with it exactly. Okay. So I'm just going to trim off those seams. I'm not even going to pull them to the back. They'll be totally fine. And there we have the lining finished. Looking forward to seeing this finished. So so that's the zipper panel added to the bag, and the next job, anyway, so that's the zipper panel added, so I'll put that aside. And the next job would be to add my strap connections to the main outer bag. So we'll turn the main outer bag wrong side out again, and I've got my strap connection pieces here, which I'm going to make with my 2 D-rings. But what I'm also going to show you is, because I'm using a leather strap, which I'll make at the very end, I'll put together at the very end, but I'm also going to show you making an adjustable strap that's fixed to your bag that you can't take off. So I will do that now, and as with the zipper, when I showed you how to do it without a zipper panel, I'm going to pin these in place. I'll make the strap and I'll pin them in place and show you what you would do next, which is to sew the lining bag to the main bag. But I'm not going to do it, because I'm then going to make these strap connection pieces for a detachable strap, which is what I'd like on this bag. So I'll put them aside for now. Back here actually, and I will get my webbing and the iron mungry for that, which is an adjustable slider, and a rectangular D-ring. So it's actually not rectangular, it's like an oval shaped D-ring in this case, but effectively the same. It could be straight at the corners, but it's a rounded corner one. So I'm going to be cutting I think it's a 10 centimeter or 4-inch piece of webbing for that, and then I'm going to be cutting a longer piece of webbing for the main strap. So I'm going to check my dimensions first, and then I'll get started. Okay, so I was correct in thinking that I need 10 centimeters of webbing, which is just under 4 inches. So I'll get that. There's my red pen. So that's for the strap connector, the webbing version of the strap connector. And then I have this called up as being, let me double check. Yeah, 130 centimeters, which is roughly 51 inches. So let's go with. Okay, so that's my 130 centimeter or 51 inch long adjustable strap piece. So we'll start with making the strap connector. So you put the rectangular ring onto the strap, and if there's a joint in the ring, you have that hidden in the center, and then just baste those ends in place. So when I'm basting a strap like that, it can very often start to shift as you sew. So I tend to start from the middle and go out and then go back that way. So just start from the middle and go out so that it stays kind of evenly centered on itself. I didn't do that, did I? I just went from the end. Well, that's what I usually do. Okay, that's worked out fine. Thread there. So I have that basted on, and I will be attaching that to one side of my side seam. And with that, it will be attached. So that's roughly 5 centimeters long. And so I like to have a bit of an overhang, because when you turn it around, it just seems to sit better if there's a bit of depth. It's not just the seam allowance depth of webbing there. It also means that you can stitch across it to reinforce it, and it means if you wanted to add a rivet to hold in place, you could do that as well. I'm going to check my dimensions on that again. Okay, so I'll leave that for a second. I'm not actually going to sew it in place now. I'll follow the tutorial. The tutorial asks me to make the webbing section first. So I will change my bobbin thread back to black. Okay, so we're going to take the webbing and the adjustable slider and thread the web up through there, and now we're going to secure that. So we're going to fold this in by about 1 centimeter, or you could do a bigger fold and have a bigger square of stitching. You're going to be attaching it like that. I might actually do it a little bit bigger. I quite like the square, so that's about 25 centimeters there. 25 millimeters, 2.5 centimeters, or a 1 inch fold. And then you want it far enough away from here so that you can turn with your sewing machine, but not too far, because that's a little bit of a waste of fabric. So the pattern calls up 6 centimeters, so I have 7 there. So let's move it back to 6. 6 centimeters is about 2.5 inches. Okay, so now I'm going to do a square of stitches, just oversailing the end of the webbing to kind of hold all the loose threads in place, and then I'm going to do an X of stitches while I'm at it. So I'll go from this is going to be my good side, my outside, so I'm going to go from this side. So I'm making sure that I'm a little bit inside the end of the fold there, which you can't really see. The fold ends there. That's my 1 inch there, my 2.5 centimeters. So I'm just inside that. My stitching, which is again a 3.5 stitch length. Turn it, and now I'm going to stitch as far as here which will just encase the edge of the webbing there. More. No, I went a little too far. I'm going to go back stitch that. Okay, which is not ideal, but it's fine. Okay, I'm going to just shorten my stitch length so that I kind of land close to the other one, and back to 3.5, and then do a diagonal. So back down along that seam line, stitch line, and so another diagonal. And back down the stitch line to start where I finished. Finish where I started. Okay, so that's my square of stitching. Just trim that all off. I would usually use matching thread as well, but the black on purple is quite discreet. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to thread I'm just making sure I'm keeping everything running. I'm not twisting the strap here. I'm going to add the strap connector to the bottom of the strap. Okay, so you can see it's like that. Okay, and then I'm going to fold that up through the bottom and through the top. Okay, and now so that's a good long strap, totally usable as a crossbody strap, or you could make it shorter. You shouldn't need it longer because if you open that right out, it's a very long strap. So I'm going to show you how to place it into your bag. I like to have the bag made so that I can now make a judgment, certainly if it's for yourself or you have an idea of what strap length you like for yourself. So one end is going to sit centered on the side seam. This is the strap connector end, and you want about, well, depending on how much you want the strap to sit up above the seam, I'm going to have it at about 2 centimeters from here to here, maybe a little bit more. The pattern calls up to have 2 centimeters or 1.5 inches, 1 and 3/4 inches, from here to here, from that point to that point. And I have there 2.5 centimeters, so 1 inch. So I think that works totally fine. So you'd have 1 inch on one side and 1 inch on the other. Let's go with that instead. So I'm going to just clip that in place for you for now. So what I would do is base that in with a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance, or 3/16 inch seam allowance, and make sure. So if you can see here, this is the fabric that's going to be sitting on my body. So I want to make sure that's up, it's facing the lining of the bag. So that's correct. You want to make sure that, I'll make this shorter so you can see it. So what you want to do when you're attaching this to your side seam, you want to make sure that the top of this, the right side of this, which is going to be sitting away from your shoulder, like looking up to the sky, that is facing the right side of your fabric. Okay, so you want to make sure that that is facing the right side of your fabric when you attach the strap there. So that is centered on the side seam. I'm going to clip it in place, and I would now baste it in place. And I want to come along and not twist my strap, so it's the same face is facing the bag, and that's going to be 1 inch from there to there. So 2.5 centimeters from there to there. And again, I would clip that in place for now, but I would baste that in place. And then that strap will be attached to the bag with those little bits sticking up. And just put your strap into your bag for the moment. And then you'll be following the step where you place the lining inside and sewing along across that with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. But I'll cover that at the end of the next step, where I actually add my strap connector pieces in. Got my 2 strap connector pieces and my 2 D-rings. So first things first, I'm going to fold these lengthways and sew down the side seams with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'll do the other one. Now I'm going to just finger press the seam open a little bit, so it makes it a little bit easier. So finger press, or get my seam roller. So that's what a seam roller is handy for. Because I don't want to fully press, I don't want to press the sides of this because I'm turning it right sides out. So I've sewn these together with the right sides facing. I'm just going to press my seam allowance open with the seam roller. Now I'm going to turn these right side out, which is a little tricky, but doable without any fancy tools. So now I'm just going to make sure my seam allowance is pressed open again. It's kind of gotten squished closed. Yep. So now I'm going to repeat that with this one here as well, and then I'm going to position the seam allowance or the seam line running down the center, and I'm going to press that flat. So I'm going to turn this one the right side out as well, and then do the same for that. And there it is. So position that in the center. I'm going to press them both nice and flat. So there they are pressed flat. I'll trim off the threads. Okay, so both pressed nice and flat. And so now I'm going to attach the D-ring with the seam that's running down the middle inside, and just baste it along the bottom to hold in place. So remember what I said about starting in the middle and moving out? I'm going to try that this time, try and remember to do it. And okay, that's perfect. The other side as well. These are going to be sewn in at a much tighter, there'll be lots off the edge there. So I have my 2 strap connector pieces. So now I'm getting my bag, my outer bag again, and I'm going to place these centered on the side seam. And I'll double check what the tutorial says in terms of yeah, so it suggests, so my tutorial, as if I didn't write it, suggests that I use, leave about 2 centimeters from there to there, and that would give me 1 centimeter sticking up above the seam allowance at the end. So if there is 1 3/4 inch from there to there, and then when you sew it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, the top of the bags together in the end, you'll have about 1 centimeter there. So I'm going to go with that this time. So I'll get my little square, ruler. Make sure my strap is running nicely perpendicular, and make sure that I have roughly 2 centimeters or 1 3/4 inch from the edge of the fabric to the turn in the strap connector. Okay, so that's perfect, or good enough. I'm not really pinning it in place, I just want to make sure it doesn't move while I go to the machine. So now I'm going to baste it in place with roughly 5 millimeter, half centimeter, or 3/16 inch seam allowance. Okay, and I'm going to trim that back. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So those are my strap connector pieces added. And now, no matter which version of strap you've made, we're now going to place the lining bag inside the outer bag and sew around the top part.